And today, we wanted to focus more on the content, what goes inside the museum that really gets the mathematical ideas across. So I'm going to talk about some of the exhibits. I couldn't possibly talk about every one. And I'm going to try to bring out some of the themes and ideas that go with them. Ideally, we might have a space that could be divided into multiple rooms, and so we could have rooms devoted to our different themes. But as you can see from our floor plan, most of the museum is one large sort of open display area. So the themes are a little more subtle, but they're there. And I'm going to talk about Cindy will be along momentarily. We'll talk about four topics that we are focusing on in Momath. Again, this doesn't cover all of the exhibits, but there's some topics that we have a special interest in. You see them there. And we'll start with puzzles. The topic of puzzles led to the creation of what is the closest thing to a room in the museum. It's rather open and porous, but nevertheless, it feels like a room. This is the Enigma Cafe, where you can go to feed your mind, not your body. Sometimes people go downstairs and they're hoping to get a cup of coffee, but instead they get a cup of, problems and puzzles to think about. So, anyhow, puzzles were clearly very important to the mathematical community that we reached out to when we were creating the museum. As you may recall from yesterday, we really canvassed dozens of mathematicians and math professionals, mathematicians in industry and so on, all over the world to generate over 400 ideas for the museum. And I've just listed here, I don't necessarily expect you to read the whole thing, but I've just listed here all of the entries in our original list of exhibit ideas that had the word puzzle in them. And you can see there were very many. And I think for many mathematicians, somehow puzzles are one of the things that draws them into the field, and they hold a special place in mathematicians' hearts. I think somehow the process of working on a puzzle is similar to the process of working on a more serious mathematical problem. There's some issue of trying to see the problem clearly, trying to understand how could this work, trying to see how do the pieces fit together. And finally, when you have the solution, that wonderful feeling of, aha, I have it. And then you look at things just a little bit differently thereafter. So it was clear that we needed a space in the museum dedicated to puzzles. And in particular, here's one of the remarks about puzzles that we got from a contributor early on. It says, sliding block puzzles are, I think, a must for this museum. There was at least one very good one at the Goudreau, solidly built, simple looking, but very tricky, with the shortest path solution of 40 or 50 moves. And so this expressed that enthusiasm that I was referring to about having puzzles, and also mentions the Goudreau Museum, which, as you may recall from yesterday, was a very small museum of mathematics, the first one, I think, in the United States, that existed on Long Island for about 20 years, but closed about 5 years prior to Momath's opening. So we at Momath were the conceptual descendants of the Goudreau Museum, and we wanted to recognize that also in the National Museum of Mathematics. And so we're very happy that with the support of some sponsors, we're able to dedicate this exhibit devoted to puzzles to the creators of the Goudreau Museum. So we gave this basic concept of let's have a room for puzzles to our chief of design, Tim Nissen. And this was the first sketch he came up with. You see some elements here. The room itself is composed out of pentominoes, which are one of the most suggested puzzles that we had. The floor is laid out as a chessboard. Obviously, chess puzzles and problems are a hobby of a number of mathematicians. Raymond Smullyan and Noam Elkies among them of note. If you notice, the little puzzle tables are arranged at the vertices of a knight's tour, or a part of a knight's tour, because of course problems about knights moving on chessboards have also been a classic. And there's little areas, so we can have quite a number of puzzles, and the little gray portions are supposed to be screens that can tell you a little bit about the puzzle that you have, the rules, what your goal is for the puzzle. So that's the very first rendering. We're trying to create a space for puzzles in the museum, and then we had to see how would that fit in the actual space. So once we had rented the actual space, we actually built a mock-up of the entire exhibit. Well, first we built a very small one, right here in the center, and then once that seemed to work well, we built it full size, entirely out of cardboard, and put it in the space before we had done any construction to make sure that it actually fit in the space. And there it is. And so here's the final rendering. And if you look carefully at this rendering, you will see that the floor has been reduced from an 8x8 chessboard to a 6x6 chessboard. So alas, we could not fit the entire chessboard into the museum. The culprit, of course, being these two columns, which just didn't leave enough room to fit in the full chessboard. So that was a little bit of a disappointment, but nevertheless, we had our puzzle room. And here it is under construction. You can see the installation of the individual puzzle tables and the building of the giant. This may be the world's largest pentomino set. We don't know. So if anybody hears of a bigger one, let us know. And then we had to decide what to put in the puzzle room. And we wanted to reach out to well-known puzzle experts. This is a gentleman named Jerry Slocum, one of the world's foremost puzzle collectors. And he is still alive, but has donated his puzzle collection to the Library of the University of Indiana. And you can go onto their website and you can search for puzzles. And if you search for all the puzzles, you see they have 24,939 different puzzles from Mr. Slocum. And of course, even though he was a very good collector, that's not all the puzzles in the world. And so we recognized that the selection process would be a very difficult one. So we actually hired a curator specifically for this exhibit to sort of comb through the world of puzzles and come up with an initial recommendation of a set of 12 puzzles that we could start with. Some well-known, chestnuts. We have to have the classics, but also some that are a little bit lesser known. And here's the selection he came up with. Oops, sorry. Here's the selection he came up with. I won't spend too long on this particular section. I'm sure you recognize some of the puzzles, and I bet there are some that you don't recognize. The Tetraxis is an interesting puzzle of fitting 12 identical triangular prisms together. They fit together in a very geometrically pleasing way. And 6-shot cushion on the bottom row is a very difficult three-dimensional dissection puzzle of a cube. So it's a number of tetrahedra and bipyramids. Every piece is either a tetrahedron or a bipyramid, and they fit together to form a perfect cube, and it's extremely difficult. So there's a big range of difficulty. There's a range of old and new puzzles, and this is our initial selection. We are planning to rotate the puzzles starting soon, and maybe once we get into a rhythm, rotating the puzzles every few months to generate new interest and enthusiasm in the museum. And in any case, here is the finished exhibit with people enjoying it in the National Museum of Mathematics. It's one of our most popular areas in the museum. So that's about puzzles. Next, I want to talk about tessellations and symmetry. For a while, we tried to divide this up into two topics, tessellations and symmetry, but it's often difficult to know where one leaves off and the other begins because, of course, any monohedral tessellation has to, if it's periodic, has to belong to one of the 17 wallpaper groups. And so you're immediately into the study of symmetry. So anyhow, we just throw these ideas together. They're both very important in the museum. This particular tessellation I'm showing here is the pattern that divides our lobby from our retail shop. And this is actually if the terms are familiar to you, this is an aperiodic parquet deformation. And there are not very many of those known. In fact, we don't know of any others besides this one. This was, we got leave to use this from Nathan Myhrvold, who designed this particular tiling. Okay, so we've been working with tessellations since even before the museum opened. Here's the exhibit from the Math Midway called Miles of Tiles. And you can see some familiar tessellations there. There's a little bit of a sort of a Penrose tiling. There's some hexagonal tilings and so on. And we went even bigger with the same idea in the museum. You see we've added more tilings that sort of are familiar figures, and kids and adults are surprised that it's possible to make a dinosaur tessellate or to make a rabbit tessellate. And so they have a lot of fun with all of those tilings. And again, I wanted to talk about how our exhibits connect with current and deep and research level mathematics. So you might think that all the basic facts of simple tessellations in the plane are well understood, but just a recent result to find the tiling by pentagons of unit area that has the least total perimeter. And it turns out that there are two such tilings that have identical perimeters, which is quite a surprise. Both of the top two tilings are by pentagons of unit area, and the perimeters of those two pentagons are identical, and they both tessellate the plane. And they share the honor of being the most efficient tiling by pentagons of the plane, if by efficiency you mean the total perimeter used. So this is research by Frank Morgan at Williams College and his colleagues. And he thought then that once he'd found these two tilings, that settled the question of what were all of the minimal perimeter pentagonal tilings of the plane. Because of course it was obvious that you couldn't use these two to tile the plane together. And so he assigned some of his summer research students, actually undergraduates, to prove that there was no tiling that shared these. And they worked on it for a while, and they were having a lot of trouble proving it until finally one of the undergraduates came up with this tiling, which in fact mixes the two types of tilings. And so it has exactly the same total perimeter. Still all the tiles are unit area. They're all pentagons. And so it is now actually, subsequent to this, they found many more mixed tilings. And so it's still an open problem as to what are all of the most efficient pentagonal tilings of the plane. And as I said, they found maybe over a dozen tilings that mix these two. They don't believe that they found them all. And we're about to install new tiles of these two shapes in the museum and allow visitors to experiment and try to find new tilings. We also, on a monitor in the museum, will have a list of all the known tilings. And so visitors can actually try to find a brand new tiling of the plane by these pentagons. And the Frank Morgan's research group is very interested in what will come out of this, because they would like to try to compile a catalog of all the possible mutual tilings of these two shapes. So this is the first real example that we've been trying to find to put in the museum of what you might call citizen mathematics. People of no particular strong mathematical preparation can come in and work on a problem and generate some partial results that are of a genuine interest to a researcher in the field. So we're really looking forward to getting that going in the museum. And then also on the topic of tessellations and symmetry, many of the tilings that we have at Tessellation Station, how do people generate those tilings? Well, they start with a simple tiling, and then they adjust the tiles. And there are certain symmetry rules that if you adjust one, if you add a vertex here, then you have to add a vertex in all these other places to keep it a monohedral tiling of the plane. And so somebody suggested that we should have an app to do this. And so again, send that to the design group, and you get something like this. You have these stations where people can generate tilings. And then we wanted to do something new, so we thought we should allow people to laser cut the tilings that they generate, so the whole exhibit would be connected to a laser cutter. And sure enough, we built it. This is one of those cases where the reality looks just exactly like the rendering. And you can sort of see on the monitor there's an application, and you can pick one of these basic tilings to start with, and then you can use the mouse to modify it. And actually, the software turned out to be the hardest part on this one, because the mathematics of how to allow to generate any monohedral tiling in the plane is not so trivial, and we relied on this wonderful book by Craig Kaplan. And Craig Kaplan also, as we got involved with him, contributed his own parquet deformation, a different one, to the museum. I won't tell you where it is. So when you come to the museum, you can see if you can find the parquet deformation created by Craig Kaplan for the museum. I'll give you a hint. It is rendered in brass. So if you find it, you'll know. Okay. So moving on from tilings in the plane, there's interest in showing tilings on other surfaces as well. Again, you don't have to read this. This is the suggestion in our original suggestion box that we should have tilings on negatively curved surfaces. And so again, we wanted to show the three possible curvatures and the fact that the types of tessellations, the combinatorial types of tessellations you can get, depend on the global curvature of the shape. Now here the tricky bit was, we know how to put magnetic tiles on a wall, but how are we going to get tiles to stick to a curved surface? So, well, we had to do some prototyping. You see, here's prototype X16. Very exciting. And in the end, this is the method that we went with, which was to turn our tile walls, our curved tile walls, into giant vacuum cleaners. And they pull in air, and then we had to find a material that would mold itself easily to the surface. And here's the finished exhibit. And you may notice there's kind of a big difference between one of these shapes. Namely, on the top left, the negative curvature shape is not a pseudosphere. It's some other surface of constant negative curvature. And why is that? Well, the problem turned out to be one of, we got in touch with a mathematician named Hyman Goodman Strauss. Here's a book that he wrote. It's about tessellations on all sorts of surfaces, and again, also about symmetry. And we got involved with him, and we said, hey, can you make us some great tessellations that we can put onto our negatively curved surface? We're planning to use a pseudosphere. And he said, oh, okay, but a pseudosphere doesn't really give you much area in the hyperbolic plane. So there's not too many tilings that will fit well on a pseudosphere. So, maybe we should look for something that has a little more real estate for your tiling. Well, then we ran into this problem, which actually had been posted to Math Overflow, if you're familiar with Math Overflow, actually some years before, which is, what is the largest hyperbolic disk embeddable in Euclidean 3 space in a smooth way? Obviously, we needed to build our exhibit smoothly so that the tiles would, could be repositionable anywhere on the surface. This turns out to be a difficult problem as far as, So there are some answers here. You can go on to Math Overflow and read in more detail, but there's a lot of interesting mathematics connected with this. We really weren't in a position to build a surface like this that kind of didn't quite intersect itself but wrapped around itself. That wouldn't work with the whole vacuum cleaner system. So we needed to find some high area embedding of hyperbolic disk, and this is what we ended up with. You can actually sort of recreate the surface. If you know it's going to be a solid of revolution, the only thing to figure out is what should this profile be. So you can start with an arbitrary profile, impose the condition that have constant negative curvature, solve the resulting differential equation, and you'll find that it has singularities. There's only a finite interval that you can define it on, And so this was the most hyperbolic real estate that we could figure out how to get. But we had a number of mathematicians, including Chaim Goodman-Strauss, Jade Vinson, and several other mathematicians working on this problem of trying to find good embeddings for us of hyperbolic disks into 3-space. So, the mathematics kept coming up in all of our exhibits, which always made us feel like we were on the right track. Moving back into the now that we're in 3 dimensions. Okay, don't read all this, but this shows really the love that some folks had about trying to build an exhibit in which one could explore different polyhedra in terms of building them up via Conway notation. So the idea is you start with some beginning polyhedra, and there are a certain set of operations, such as truncating all of the vertices, or adding new vertices at the center of every face, and pulling out a pyramid, and so on, with which one can generate additional vertices. Here's the first mock-up of what that exhibit might look like in practice. Oops, wrong direction. Here it is built. Looks, reasonably similar. And here, the tricky bit, there's a lot of computational geometry that goes into this. In particular, just the simple operation of computing the dual of a polyhedron and then redisplaying the dual. So combinatorially, there's no problem in computing the dual, right? You just have the graph of the vertices and the edges, and you take the dual graph, and that's all well and good. But now you want to realize that in 3 dimensions as a polyhedron. And of course, you know that it can be, by Steinitz's theorem, you know that it can be realized as a polyhedron, but that, Steinitz's theorem is not constructive, and that doesn't necessarily tell you how to actually embed it. And so there's a lot of literature on this subject, actually. Here, just one particular, this is from a sort of a survey paper on the topic. And, we've tried these things. And they're very nice, but they're computationally very intensive. And to this day, we do not have a good, fast method of rendering the dual of a polyhedron. You think this is such a simple problem, and it turns out not to be. So again, a sense that we're on a good track with picking exhibits that have us grappling with meaty mathematical problems. And now returning to the to 2 dimensions. From 3, and also to show, all the different places that our inspirations come from. This one we owe thanks to the Museum of Minerals and Mathematics, which is in Oberwolfach, near the well-known research institute there. So we went on a tour of different math museums, and we saw this exhibit. Where one can choose one of the 17 wallpaper groups and then just draw, and whatever you draw will be replicated according to the group that you chose. And we wanted to make it feel a bit more concrete. So we decided to make a very strong analogy to painting. So we wanted to have a physical brush that you would stick into a physical can, and then you could paint on a virtual canvas, and of course, every stroke of paint that you made would be replicated by whichever of the symmetry groups you had chosen. And so there's the conceptual rendering, and then we had somebody build it. There's our virtual easel. Has all these lovely cans of paint. There's a sensor when you dip your only the special brush. That was the trick. We didn't want people to be able to dip their fingers in and change the color of the person who's painting. The paint had to feel real. So only the paintbrush will trigger the change in color. And then you can take your brush and you can paint on the screen. And here you see, these are actually some undergraduate students from Yale, I believe. Painting on the exhibit there. And then, of course, having done the wallpaper groups, there was a desire to also include the frieze groups. So this was an exhibit that was just generated internally during the process of creating polypaint. We wanted to also show a way of visualizing frieze groups. And we thought with frieze groups, they were simple enough that we could do a direct physical rendering. We wouldn't need to have a digital exhibit. We always prefer to have something that people can really touch and feel. So the idea here is there's a sort of a surface, and there's a very thin supply of water. and you're going to take one of these paint rollers, and you're going to put some shapes on it, and then you're going to roll. And of course, by virtue of rolling, you always end up with a frieze pattern. It's got to have at least one translational symmetry, and if you put your shapes on carefully, it may have any one of the other 6 frieze groups in terms of its symmetries. Now, this is an exhibit that took a great deal of prototyping. You can see we tried many different surfaces to roll on. We tried many different materials for the shapes until we were getting nice, consistent images that would have the desired symmetry. This probably was the most prototyping intensive of any of our exhibits. And then we've installed it in the museum, and you can see people are able to create their rollers and actually make designs on the paper. And again, of course, wallpaper groups and frieze groups are well understood, but nevertheless, they do serve as a real spur to mathematical inquiry. We had one of our volunteer interpreters who come in and help people in the museum. He, of course, got to know about polypaint, the wallpaper group exhibit, and about water freeze. And he started thinking, and he said, in the polypaint, we're looking at patterns in the plane that have at least 2 independent translational symmetries. Okay, I get that. And we're looking at, in water freeze, we're looking at patterns in the plane that have exactly 1 translational symmetry, so not another independent translational symmetry. Okay, so that's interesting. But what about 3 dimensions? And I said, the crystallographic groups, they're well known. There's 219 of them, and it's just like the 3-dimensional version of the 3-dimensional version of polypaint. And he said, no. What if you have a pattern in 3 dimensions that has exactly 2 translational symmetries, and not a third independent one? Well, what are the possible groups of symmetries then? Is that known? And I had no idea what the answer is. And I've asked quite a number of mathematicians, is this known? Is there a classification of these groups? And until just recently, everyone I asked had no idea what the answer was. So I thought this is a pretty good question. If I can ask, a dozen professional mathematicians, and none of them know the answer, it's a decent question. It does turn out to be a solved problem, however. So you can go to Wikipedia. I didn't actually look up when this was posted. Maybe this was posted after. No. In any case, it has been solved. You can go to Wikipedia. Turns out the term for these groups is layer group. So we have the wallpaper groups, we have the frieze groups. These groups that are symmetries of 3 dimensions groups of symmetries of 3 dimensions that only have 2 independent translational symmetries are called the layer groups. They are classified, but nevertheless, I thought this is a pretty good example of the exhibits in the museum, spurring genuine, if already done, mathematical inquiry. So we're very pleased when that happens. Okay, moving on, another theme that shows up in the museum is fractals. This picture is not an exhibit in the museum. This is a public sort of installation that we did. It's called Julia's Stars. And in this case, we used, so of course, a Julia set is, if you take the dynamical system, take a complex number z to z squared plus a constant, the Julia set is the boundary between the points that go off to infinity and the points that stay in some neighborhood of the origin. And we wanted to actually try to compute that Julia set live as a public installation. And it turns out that if you invert the dynamical system, so you take z to the square root of z plus the constant, then every point converges often quite rapidly to that boundary, to the Julia set. So we actually built a mechanical linkage that would calculate the square root of a complex number. Well, we'd add a constant with a little horizontal stick to add the constant, and then we would use this linkage to compute the square root. So we had a physical apparatus for computing the square roots of complex numbers. And we started with one of these points, just one. I don't know which one, but we started with one of these points. And then every person who participated came up with two of these little lights and calculated the two square roots of z plus 1. We picked one that was already going, calculated the two square roots, added their lights, and iterated as many people came through. This shows the state of the exhibit after 100 or so people came through. And lo and behold, it's a little low resolution, but nevertheless, the Julia set is quite recognizable. And we were very pleased that we could do a completely analog calculation, if you will, of this particular Julia set. This is for z goes to z squared minus 1. That is the original dynamical system. We're finding the Julia set here. So anyhow, that's not in the museum, but it's an example of an outreach activity that we did. In the museum, we have a couple of exhibits about fractals. This is, again, to show the range of places that the ideas came from. This actually came from a YouTube video, which you can find at this URL here, or if you can't remember that URL, you can just Google multiple video feedback. So that image there was produced with no digital computing devices, just one webcam and 3 projectors. And you give one projector to each person, and you have them point the projectors at different angles at the screen. And then the camera is, of course, recording the screen. And the feedback loop that's produced creates this fractal image. So I said, hey, we could do that. And of course, if we're going to have, the first thing we decided is that you could flip. There's a sort of symmetry between the role of the projectors and the cameras. So instead of 3 projectors, we have 3 cameras. And if you're going to make an exhibit with cameras, and you have to have the cameras on stands, of course, what better shape to use than Sierpinski triangles to hold up the cameras. So there's the exhibit in production. And rather than showing you what the exhibit itself looks like, it looks basically like you could imagine from those prototyping pictures. Let me show you what it does. This is an image taken off of the screen from this exhibit. So you can really produce a remarkable array of fractals almost effortlessly. Again, it's an analog computation of fractals. And then finally, we do have one digital fractal exhibit. This is called Human Tree. And again, to show you where the ideas come from, you can find this on the web. It's a classic image that somebody came up with, kind of an interesting idea. This here is the so-called Pythagorean tree. So you start with any Pythagorean triangle, and then you iterate. And this guy here is Theo Gray, who is a principal at Wolfram Research, and also wrote a book called The Elements, which became very famous, translated into many languages. You may be familiar with the book. Anyhow, we met him at a Mathematica conference at one point, and he said, I would like you to combine these two ideas. So in this Pythagorean tree, there's no reason why that square couldn't represent somebody's body, and then the 2 branches are their arms, and then we're going to use pictures of people like this. And instead of being a picture of people, it should be the visitor, and it should react in real time to the position that the visitor chooses by replacing the arms, with the picture of the torso. And so, we mocked it up, and sure enough, there it is, and it works. Again, I put the rendering on the top left just so you get a clearer picture of what's going on. The 2 visitors stand on the 2 red circles. Their image is taken, and then it is replicated in this tree pattern. And since we're doing trees, we thought maybe sometimes trees flower, or maybe in winter they don't have any flowers. But in any case, you can see the pattern that her image is replicated on her shoulders, and so on and so forth. And you generate a tree fractal. And it's in real time, and visitors can just immediately experiment with the parameter space. And it's much easier to experiment this way than it is if you've got sliders for the angles and the distances and so on. That's much more intuitive. So this is probably our second most popular exhibit after the square-wheeled tricycle, which we talked about yesterday. So that's Human Tree. Okay, so we're going to switch off now, and Cindy's going to take over. So we'll do a little microphone switch and talk to you about another couple of things.
Okay, so I will continue where Glen left off. This is a very interesting picture. This is actually a picture of a model for a staircase that we were hoping to have in the museum. And the idea is that it would look like the model on the right. That is, it wouldn't look like a staircase at all, and periodically it would rotate open, and then it could be used as a staircase and visitors could go up and down, and then the staircase would disappear and be gone again. And this was designed by actually someone in the Department of Design at Stanford University, and he was very happy for us to use this design. So this was our initial staircase concept. You might be wondering why this is under the term algebra. We're going to get to that. But I guess what I should tell you is that we were short by about 3 inches of being able to fit this in the space that we had. And so very late in the game, we suddenly had no staircase exhibit. Oops. Is this out of order?
Go ahead.
That doesn't seem right.
Okay, well, just skip that one then.
Okay. Here we go. So this is an exhibit that we saw on a visit to the Mathematicum in Gießen, Germany. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this principle of a parabola, but it's a very interesting principle, which is to say that if you make any chord on the parabola, which is shown here connecting 2 points, and you look at the 2 x values, so these strings here are dropping down vertically to show you the x values. Well, if you square if you multiply the 2 absolute values of the x values together, so here it's hard to see, but this value here is on an x value of 9, and this one is on an x value of -10. And if you multiply 9 times 10, you get 90, and that chord will cross at 90. And that's true no matter where you move those pins. So if you connect a point that's at 3, 9 and a point that's at -5, 25, that chord will cross exactly at 15. So this is a principle that you can actually prove with a little bit of algebra, and we thought it was pretty neat, and so we wanted to make something like this for the museum. And so Tim started doing some design drawings of the sort that you've seen with some of the other exhibits, and he came back to us and he said, we can't have this exhibit after all, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Well, you want to go from -10 to 10 on the horizontal, on the x-axis. That means you have to go all the way up to 100 on the y-axis. And our space wasn't big enough to have constant units that went from -10 to 10 this way and all the way up to 100. If we made 0 to 100 work, then 10 to -10 was very tiny and hard to see. And if we made -10 to 10 very legible, we didn't have enough space to go up to 100. So we thought about maybe having a different scale on the x and y axes, but we decided that would be very confusing. And so we threw this exhibit idea in the garbage. It was one of the ones that we decided not to do. But then we had this exhibit that didn't work, didn't fit, and we had a staircase that had no exhibit. So it occurred to me suddenly that maybe we did have enough space to go from 0 all the way up to 100 if only we used the entire staircase going from the bottom floor to the top floor. And I thought maybe we could make this a staircase exhibit, and it could be just on the wall, like you see here, on the wall as people go up the stairs. And so that was my contribution to the design idea. But the great contribution then was our chief of design, and you'll know why he's the chief when you hear this idea. He said, that's a great idea, but not on the wall. We're going to rotate it in 3 dimensions. We're going to make the solid of revolution of a parabola. We're going to have a giant paraboloid. And all of those chords, they're not just going to be strings. They're going to be electroluminescent wire, and they're going to light up when people push buttons. And so this was the original drawing, and then this is what Tim conceived when we decided to put it in the staircase. You can see the stairs are spiraling around. Here's one of the design drawings early on. And here it is in construction. This had to come in multiple pieces. You can see one piece on the left. This is not a rendering on the right. This is an actual photograph. Another nice design idea that Tim had is instead of having just a straight ruler on the y-axis, or what turns out to be the z-axis in this case, he made it spiral around. And this is the finished product. And this is what you walk around and you see as you go down the stairs. You spiral around a giant paraboloid. And the things that are lit up there, they're not all lit up all the time. What happens is someone at the top or the bottom of the stairs, it works from either place, chooses 2 numbers, and pushes those two buttons. So if you push 7 and 8, the cord that goes from 7 to 8 will light up. You can see the circular rings. Those are actually like your X values. So you're at a radius from the center pole of, in fact, you can see the red numbers. There's a 5 up there. There's a 4 over here. So if somebody pushes a 4 and a 5 at the same time, the wire connecting the 4 circle to the 5 circle lights up, and you can see that it will actually cross that vertical axis at 20. So what's really nice about this exhibit is something that we tried to do with all of our exhibits. We were more or less successful in certain cases, is that it appeals to a very wide range of people. I'm not sure how many of you here already knew that principle of a parabola, but many mathematicians haven't seen that before. So even mathematicians come in and they're surprised to see that. And then we get high school students or advanced middle school students who have just learned about a parabola and they know about the equation of a line. And they'll take out a piece of paper and they can actually sit down and prove why that's always the case, why it has to be the case. That's where algebra comes in. And then you get younger kids, maybe 3rd or 4th grade, and they don't know what a parabola is, but they just learn their multiplication tables. And so to them, they push 2 buttons and they see the multiplication table come to light. And then finally, for really little kids, they don't even know multiplication, they don't know parabolas, but they know about pushing buttons and lights going on. And so they like it too. And so literally, you'll have a PhD mathematician and a 3-year-old playing with the same exhibit and enjoying it in different ways. So we think that's one of the hits of the space. There are more exhibits that will be coming. We mentioned briefly yesterday Robot Swarm. That's an exhibit where these autonomous or semi-autonomous robots will be under your feet, under glass. You'll be wearing something special so that they know where you are, they know where they are. And another visitor can program a behavior. So you can program a behavior that says, they really like me, but they can't stand Glen. And then as we walk around on the floor, they'll all swarm to me and run away from Glen. Or we can program that they should stay a certain amount of distance from each other. And you can see the effects, which are sometimes very natural, very much like flocking animals. On the lower left is an exhibit called Hoop Curves. That one will probably be coming in sometime next year. In that exhibit, you take a free throw, and the exhibit measures the angle you threw the ball, the speed you threw the ball, a couple other parameters, and it tracks whether you got the ball in or not. And so over time, visitors can see what's the right angle to get the ball in, how fast should I throw it, that sort of thing. We hope to get a couple of famous basketball players to take some shots so we can show what their parameters are. And then there's an automated ball thrower. And so you can actually, it's hard even if you know that the angle should be exactly 23 degrees or whatever it might be hard to throw that way. But we'll have an automated ball thrower so you can then program in what looks to be like the most common way to get the ball in the basket. Push the button, it will shoot, and hopefully it will go in. So that's a very ambitious exhibit. And on the right, you see a little beaver. And that's an exhibit that'll be coming in probably the next one after Robot Swarm. And those are a bunch of beavers that go around on a very special kind of track. The track rotates, pieces of it move. And the idea is that there are 2 beavers, but it's mathematically impossible for them to hit each other or collide, no matter how you turn the track around. So we think that's sort of an interesting thing. We know kids will try to make them collide. They won't be able to, and if they want to know why it doesn't work, they'll have to study a little bit of mathematics. So now I want to move on to talking about some of the outreach, which is something that I think some of you were interested in, and we certainly heard about some wonderful outreach that goes on here as well. So we're going to talk about 3 different kinds of outreach that we do. This is not all the outreach we do, but this is just a sampling. One thing we do a lot of, and I have a lot of pictures to show you, are what we call large-scale building events. Those are where we try to get lots of people involved. Generally, each person makes something little, and then those little things come together, and then those things come together, and in the end, you have something quite impressive. Glen does math tours. He started this before the museum was even open. We ask people to choose the place where they want the tour to begin and end, give Glen a few days' notice. He goes and scouts it out, and he finds some very unusual math to talk about no matter where people suggest. We haven't found a place yet that he can't find some math. So it's kind of a nice way of showing people that math is all around them. And finally, we have something that we're calling Math Happenings. We've done one so far. It's kind of like a large public gathering, and I'll talk more about that when we get to that topic. So let's start with our large-scale construction events. This was my first experience with a large-scale construction event, and it was a failure. This was designed by somebody on staff, and all those pieces that you see laying on the floor were supposed to build something wonderful. So I think part of the lesson here is not to give up. I have some more failing examples that we'll see, but also some pretty spectacular successes. So the other thing to note is that people had a lot of fun, even though overall this event didn't quite stay together the way we hoped it would. So these were all custom designed pieces, and you can see everybody was having a good time putting them together. It was getting more and more complicated. It was supposed to make something that looked like this, you know, all the way around. In the end, we got about this far, and then it couldn't hold up its own weight. And everybody was very happy to take a picture with the piece of it that we got done. And we put it away, and we called it a success, but it wasn't exactly what we'd been hoping to do. This is an example of something that I know you have here, a Zoom tool. And this is a giant construction that was hanging in the museum for a while that visitors actually built over 2 days, the first day that the museum was open. And here's an example of some smaller Zoom tool constructions that we did with a group of students. These are high school students that we were working with. And there's a lot of different symmetries that you can see in this piece. If you look through it in certain directions, you get a very different view than if you look in other directions. So here are the ones that the kids made. And then here is the day after we opened the museum. People were working on this. And again, that's the final construction. I did a whole lot of those little blue triangles in there until I was sent home because it was 2 o'clock in the morning. And I think I fell asleep over some of those blue triangles. But that hung in the museum for quite some time. So that's something that's really easy to do. The people at Zoom are very friendly. If you want ideas or models to do something giant like that, I've now been to 2 or 3 conferences where Zoom constructions have been made that are, you know, 7, 8, 10 feet tall. And it's just a really nice way for people to come together, have a good time, and then walk away feeling like they accomplished something. And also, then these things can hang for a while in your math department. We're here in CIMAT, and they look pretty nice.
That one's a truncated 120 cell, if anyone's wondering.
And since I'm on microphone, I'll repeat that. This is a truncated 120 cell, in case you were wondering exactly what it was. So you can also build with things like balloons. And this is a hyperbolic surface that was constructed at the joint math meetings a number of years ago. And people had a lot of fun putting balloons together. And that was what the structure ended up looking like. So it doesn't have to be expensive pieces that you use. You can really use anything. We can use these. So here, this is the 4th of July, one summer at the beach. One of my friends brought these white sticks that she found online, very cheap. And you push a button and they light up. And I thought, we can use these in the museum. I don't know how, but we can use these. And so I brought them in and showed them to someone on staff who's pretty good at geometry. And he played around with some rubber bands, and we decided we would have a group construction event with these. And so everybody made these little tetrahedra. And then it was like a little camp of tetrahedra. But then we put them all together. We hung them up and suspended them. And in the end, we had this giant structure. So people really enjoyed that. This is actually in the raw space of the museum before it was finished. So we did have some events there. Oops. And then we take one idea, sometimes you can build on it. So Glen had the idea that what if we could find some plastic tubes and take those cheap foam lights that we had and somehow insert them in the tubes? Wouldn't that make a beautiful structure? And in fact, right here, this is just the little sticks that you crack and they glow. I don't know if they have those here. Yeah? So this is a small model on the table that Glen showed me and said, I think we should do this giant. And so we did. We could only find tubes. It's hard to see, but there's like a seam right here. We had to tape 2 tubes together because we wanted to reach all the way up to the ceiling. And so there's Tim. We're starting to put this together, and Glen. And we had all kinds of braces and ladders, and it was all very good. You see, we almost got all the way up to the ceiling. Everything was going very well. We were very proud of ourselves. Yep, we reached the ceiling. It's all just rubber bands and plastic tubes. And a moment later, the whole thing collapsed. You can't see it, but Glen's got a little cut on his face where he was swiped by a plastic pipe as it fell, adding injury to insult, I guess. So we had to rethink the design, and we had to come up with a new way of building this. This was something we wanted to do at a big public event that was going to have 300-400 people. So imagine if that collapsed in that circumstance. So we were glad we had tried it first. So we ended up coming up with an idea to make 4 separate pieces and have 3 be the base and the 4th one on top, rather than trying to make very long members. And so we tried again. And this time we were much more successful. Oops. And we went public with it. This is the actual event. Here are the 4 pieces. And they got mounted together into this with rubber bands before people arrived. And then that's what it looked like face on. And here are all the people lined up with their glow sticks. So everybody got a stick, and they all came up, and one by one they could put their stick inside. You can see people were having a good time doing that. And it started to fill up, and even Glen got involved. And at the end, this is what it looked like. And so people felt really excited. Everybody wanted to take their picture with this. We did it again. It was so much fun, we thought we would take it back to the museum. And so this is in the museum space. We invited anybody who wanted to come and help rebuild this a second time. And it was a lot of fun again. And as you can see, it's coming together. Has anybody here ever heard of RSA technology, encryption? That's Ron Rivest. He's the R in RSA. He was there for this event. And here it is. First it gets put together, and then again people insert the glow sticks. And it's quite lovely when it's finished. And again, people just love to go inside and have their picture taken, including us. So that was successful. As you can tell from this picture, we're going to now see another fail attempt. So we got the idea that we could build something out of hula hoops for the World Science Festival. Again, we were smart enough at least to try it first in Glen's backyard. So everything was going well in the beginning. We would put 4 hula hoops together into a sort of tetrahedron made out of hula hoops. And we had lots of volunteers, kids and adults, come by. And soon we had lots of these little pieces. And then 4 of these would be put together to make another. And then the idea was to put 4 of those together. And that seemed to be okay. And then we wanted to go one more level. And as you can see, when we started to lift it up with the idea that we would put more pieces under it, you can kind of see the center is starting to cave a little bit. And yep, it's caving all right. And that's where we ended up. So that was about 2 weeks before we had promised to be at the World Science Festival with something really exciting. So we had one more weekend. And so Glen and Tim thought about it. There they are thinking. And you can see all we had holding these together were pipe cleaners. And so we realized we needed something stronger. And we decided to buy some medical adhesive tape, that would work better. And it did work better, but we had to buy all of it from every town around to have enough. And so if anybody had gotten hurt that weekend, they would have had a hard time finding that tape. So you can see it was even getting dark, and they were still contemplating, where the stress points were and how we could make this work. We also ended up having to use some PVC pipe to put a little structure in the middle. But now you see all those little white pieces? That's where we're going to end up the next weekend. So now we started, and we had this sort of tape that you could wrap around and it sticks to itself, and that was much sturdier. And so we went again, and this time you can see there's 2 white pipes in the middle. That was for added structure and stability. And now we were able to make a structure that stood up. So that was very exciting. Here are the volunteers. These are the volunteers who came back a second time. Not quite as many as the first time. And then we took this to the streets of New York City. And we started out the same way. People were building. Kids had a great time just being inside something like this. And you can see it's getting bigger and bigger. And eventually, that's how tall it was. And it stood like that for some time. And again, you can see the happy people. Everybody likes to be inside something like this. But we weren't done. Next year at the World Science Festival, we did something even bigger. And the idea for this one came out of an error. So we have a Math Encounters public presentation series we talked about yesterday, and we make a poster, and we wanted to mail those posters to schools, but somebody ordered the wrong size tube for the poster. And you can't see, but there's about 10 boxes like that one, all filled with the wrong size tube. And this is George Hart. He's one of the 4 people who helped found the museum. And he just got bored and thought, what can we do with all of these mailing tubes? And so he did that with mailing tubes and rubber bands. And that gave us the idea for what we would do at the World Science Festival the next year. And so those are just longer mailing tubes covered with colored paper and with some plastic end caps and some hardware that we put in. And you can see that was sort of the initial piece that people would make. And that was pretty easy. Kids and adults could make that together. And then we would put 3 of them and a 4th one. So now we're starting to see a fractal. It's a Sierpinski tetrahedron is where we're going. And so each one of these pieces, well, now you can see a lot of them. There's Tim sitting among them. And we put those together. And now that's 1/4 of where we're going to end up. So we have, in order to build this, though, we had to put 1 piece at a time and keep lifting from the bottom. So that's almost done. There's another layer that has to go underneath. And here you can see people are lifting because we're trying to put now all the pieces underneath. And in the end, that's how tall it was. People could see it from very far away. And many of the people who stayed to finish this were people who had started in the beginning making the tiny tetrahedron. So it was something that really people felt good about, because people could say, I made 3 of those, I made 5 of those, and now look what we have. So that's what it looked like when we were done. This is another project we did. I would call this one not quite a success, not quite a failure. This used bent metal pieces, and they had to be put together in a certain orientation. And everybody had a great time putting it together, but at some point, I think someone got the orientation backwards. And so it didn't actually come out the way we thought, but we also didn't tell anybody that it didn't come out the way we thought, and so everybody was very happy with it. Only we knew that it wasn't exactly what we had planned, so it doesn't quite look symmetric there, but they all look happy, and that was what mattered. Now we also came up with a new idea, something called the multimorphing megaplex. These are what the pieces look like. We cut these on a laser cutter out of wood. I know you guys could do that. And put them together, and we had to glue them. That was very time intensive. The interesting thing about this, you might have noticed the title was Multimorphing Megaplex. That's an interesting title. You might wonder where that title came from. This was a situation where we were invited to participate in the United States Science and Engineering Festival, but it was many months before the festival, and they said, you must tell us what you are bringing. And it was pretty early on. We didn't really have a repertoire of what we could bring. So I was sitting with one of my colleagues, and I said, well, let's just make up a name, and then we'll figure out what it should be. And so we said, we're bringing the multimorphing megaplex. And it's got all these little pieces, and you can build lots of different things with it. And we were very general in our very enthusiastic description. And then this is what we came up with to fill that. And so it's a series of hubs and sticks that you can put together. And this was the first time we tried it out. We weren't open yet, so this was at another science museum that was kind enough to let us bring this and try it out with their visitors. And you can see people are having a lot of fun. The orange things you see are twist ties. So those are very cheap. They're easy to use. They are a big pain in the neck to take out at the end of the day when you want to take the whole thing apart. But it was a prototype. And we were able to build a giant archway, and you can see Glen under there. So people really enjoyed that. And so since it worked so well, we took it various places. This is another World Science Festival. This is actually a Barnes & Noble bookstore that was having a night that they invited us to bring something. So all the people that came to buy books got to build something that night. And then we went back to the USA Science and Engineering Festival that we had promised the multimorphing megaplex. And you can see people are having a good time building, I think those might be Stella Octangula. And we made sort of a fractal with those. And you can see it's getting bigger and bigger. And the kids are really very engaged with this. And we made a giant pyramid out of that. And this is starting to go up. There's another layer that's going to go underneath. And that's how big it got. And again, people just really enjoy building things that are giant. At the very end, you had to get somebody holding up a kid to put the top on. But there we are. And that little kid was there from the very first piece. And he was so excited. He wanted to be in the picture with us, and we wanted him in the picture with us. So then we improved it. The twist ties were a problem, and also the wood would snap, so kids would break it, they would step on it. This is actually made out of a kind of plastic that took us a long time to find. We kept ordering samples of plastic, and then we would try to break it. And it's really easy to break most plastic. But this, I think, is a Delrin. This is a plastic called Delrin, and we couldn't break this one. You can break it if you keep trying, but it's really hard to break. So we redesigned the pieces now out of plastic. We made them brightly colored. We went back to the Science and Engineering Festival, and we used these pieces. And you can see they sort of are more attention-getting in color. The problem we have with these now, we thought we could make these and sell them, but it's so expensive for us to make them that we can't actually sell them for a price that people would buy them for. So they just stay as something that we do as an outreach. And you can see, again, people just having a wonderful time building. Here we're lifting it up, and eventually it gets very big. Here we have to have the girl on someone's shoulders to be able to put the top piece on, and that's where we landed with it. Now you don't have to have fancy pieces that you make on a laser cutter with fancy plastic. This is an example, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, of various things you can do with string. And if you look carefully, you can see in the bottom right, we had people holding wooden spoons that were very inexpensive. So instead of, the original idea was you wrap a string around your hand and you sit, but kids and strings wrapping around hands, probably not a good idea. So Glen had the great idea that we would get some inexpensive wooden spoons. A kid can hold that. When the string comes their way, they can go once around the spoon and pass it along. And so we first tried this at Liberty Science Center. I think I showed you this picture yesterday. It's a complete graph. Then we took it back to the World Science Festival. We did little small versions, and eventually we did a larger version where we had many people. And kids love to go under this, and after we're done and they've gone under it, then we put it down, and you can really talk about the pattern you see on the ground. This one, we made a pattern that turns out to be a cardioid, so it starts very simply, and I just show a couple of pictures as we go along. And when the whole thing is done, you can see the heart shape in the middle. So that was exciting for people. And you can see the crowd that we had gathered around at that point. So people come by and they see something with brightly colored string and they want to be part of it. So that's pretty easy to do. Moving on from large-scale public events, I mentioned that Glen does math tours. And we've done them all over the country. We haven't done one in Mexico yet, but maybe one day. And this is an interesting picture to start with because the gentleman on the left, his name is Erno Rubik. He is the inventor of the Rubik's Cube, if you've heard of that. And the gentleman on the right, who's actually in a wheelchair that day, is someone you may or may not know. His name is Alan Alda. He's a famous actor. Those of you that are my age will probably nod your head, and those of you that are younger won't have any idea who he is. So here's the first math tour Glen did. It's very funny. This is a good example of why, if you do decide to open a museum, it's good to have a good PR firm. So we had a public relations firm that was trying to work with us to build awareness of the museum that we wanted to build. And the woman got the idea that Glen should do math tours. He never did a math tour before, but she said, this is what you should do. And she called someone who writes for a magazine and said, Glen does these wonderful math tours. And again, it was kind of like the multi-morphing megaplex. She basically talked it up, and then Glen had to figure out how to fulfill what she had arranged. But this actually made it into a magazine called The New Yorker, which is a pretty important magazine. And the gentleman, the author named Nick Baumgarten, who was on this first tour, wrote an article called Mathhattan, which is a play on Manhattan, where New York City. And more people saw that article. That created so much buzz for us. People got in touch with us. So that was very helpful. And so here he is on that first math tour. And he did many math tours after that. Sometimes he would almost get hit by a truck. And, oops. This one is down in Florida, so you can see the nice weather, and in fact, the palm trees. We didn't mind doing that one. It was in the winter in New York, which is not exactly a coincidence. This was another one where you were talking about what with the balls?
The size of the federal deficit.
Ah, yes, the size of our federal deficit. Here Glen is in the subway. We actually took people down into the subway as part of the tour, so we move around a lot with these tours. Here's another one that's in New York City, and oops. This one is in Washington, D.C. We had kids and adults estimating how many bricks were in this sculpture, in the sculpture garden. And then, believe it or not, with a ruler and a protractor and a string and a binder clip as a weight, Glen was able to measure the height of that building you see in the background. And so was everybody else there. And we did this tour twice, and we measured 2 of the monuments in Washington, D.C. And Glen asked, what did everybody get? And people would raise their hand and talk about the number that they got from this very primitive calculation. But on one of the tours, somebody raised their hand and gave the number. And of course, we had looked up the actual height of these buildings. And this person had measured it exactly right to the nearest foot. And Glen almost fell on the ground. He was like, what? What did you get? Because we were going to talk about the error and how it's never going to be exactly right. But that person got it right. So that was kind of fun. And then the last thing I want to talk about are these public gatherings that we refer to as math happenings. And it's plural, but we've only done one so far. But we do have a plan for another one. So the interesting thing about this one is that it came about. There was a group of volunteers, and we got to talking about the fact that December 12th, 2013. December 5th. Yeah, sorry, 12/5/13. December 5th, 2013, in a way, was a Pythagorean triple, 5, 12, 13. And so we decided, let's call that Pythagoras Day, and let's do something. We don't know what we're going to do. We should do something. And then we realized that the Flatiron Building, which is a famous landmark building in New York City, happens to be a right triangle, believe it or not. And so we actually measured it. Right there in this meeting, people started looking up online what the sides were of the Flatiron Building. And it turns out to be, when reduced, a 5, 12, 13 right triangle. So we decided that was coincidence that we couldn't ignore. So we were going to do something with the Flatiron Building. And remembering how much people loved those glowing sticks, we thought, let's use those as a unit of measure, and let's measure around the Flatiron Building. We'll give everybody a stick, and we can count how many sticks on each side, and then we can show that the Pythagorean theorem works, and won't that be fun? And we figured out that we needed about 550 or so sticks to go around, which meant we needed over 500 people. And we didn't think we'd get over 500 people. But we thought, we'll tape those sticks together, and then we only need about 250 people. And we thought we could get 250 people by asking anyone who ever volunteered for the museum before to come for a free dinner at the museum. And I told you, food is important. And then those people would come from the dinner, and then we would all walk to the Flatiron Building, which is very close to the museum. And we would have 2 sticks taped together, and we would have enough people to prove this would be the case. We put out one email, and we made it sound really great. And, well, thousands of people responded. Everybody wanted a glow stick. We had the opposite problem. We had too many people. So then we had to think of, what are we going to do? We only need 500 people. And it just every day, it was like we have 700 people. We have 1,200 people. We have 2,000 people who have responded. So we told everyone that only some people could be the holders of the light sticks. We made sort of teams, and everybody else was on the cheering squad. And we told them that they must come wearing or sporting their favorite right triangle. And we didn't give any more information than that. And then we decided this is getting very big, so we need to do something else other than just measure. So we should do a projection right on the sides of the building. And so I don't know if you can see, this is Glen and Tim. So now we started this, we don't know if we're really allowed to do this in New York City. So we're going out at like midnight to try things when nobody's around to tell us not to. And so the first thing we tried were some high-powered flashlights. We thought we could put a mask on them and we could shine things. And so there we are, there's Glen and Tim with the flashlights trying to shine at the Flatiron Building. We had a computer to try and work out exactly what we would do. You can almost see there's like a square up there. It's a little hard to see. We thought we would get a laser projector. We found out those were illegal, and we didn't want to be arrested, so we didn't do that. So we ended up getting giant projectors. There it is. That's the giant projector we bought. Now it's cold out, right? This is December. We're traipsing out there like 3-4 nights a week. Tim had to build a special cart, not only to lug those projectors, but they needed giant Duracell batteries. And those batteries last for a while inside, but we discovered by doing this that they last for exactly 9 minutes outside, and then they die. So we've got 3 giant projectors. We're going to put one on each side of the building. We're going to animate some kind of proof of the Pythagorean theorem, which Glen is now teaching himself to animate. He's not an animator, but he learned. And we've got these big carts. You can see the Duracell battery on the left. And well, now you can see the square is very bright. Again, we're doing this at midnight, and now we're playing around with what this might look like. You can see this was just Glen typing on his computer, massive text, big text down low, trying to figure out what we would do. And here we are in the office trying to get ready. So here's the Flatiron building, and here's what we were going to try and do. You've probably all seen a proof like this. And here we are, we're trying to get the angle right. He had to build a cart that would aim the projector just right. It had to be different on the 3 different sides of the building. But you can see from the looks on their faces, it's looking like something's going on up there. And now it's really bright. And you can imagine, we have no permission for this. So we're still trying to be very quiet about it. But at some point, we got a little worried. And so I contacted the police department to let them know that there might be like 2,000 people on the street. But I didn't get in touch with them. I left a message. And then the police officer in charge, he left me a message back. And we traded messages the entire weeks up to this, but I never spoke to him. And I thought that's the best possible position to be in, because we certainly tried to get in touch with you, officer, but we never got to ask the question. They say it's much better to ask forgiveness than permission sometimes. So here we are about to go out, and we made little jackets that say math happened. We made a big deal about this. And sure enough, we get out there, and people just start pouring out from every which direction. And we didn't really know if it would happen or not. But so now you're going to see what some people showed up with their idea of bringing or sporting their favorite right triangle. So this guy, he had a proof on his leg. This guy made a proof out of little cheese crackers and took a picture and brought it. This girl decorated her face. These people made hats. Oh, you can't see, she's got a hat. I guess the picture is a little too high off the screen. These 3 ladies all made hats also, and they all carried a number. One was, 5, 12, and 13. Here's a group of younger folks. What's interesting is the last picture were some retirees, and here we have some young folks. So it was really fun the way this brought people from very young to very old. And everyone made different things. This woman, and the hats were popular. And now here are people lining up to measure. And you can see we literally went all the way around the entire building. So we sort of had a lot of attention. And we showed people, this is where you are. We gave them a sense of what we were going to do. And, well, we did a big rearrangement proof right on the sides of the building, all 3 sides at the same time. At one point, so we ended up with almost 3,000 people, actually. And at one point, as this rearrangement was going on, we got everyone to start chanting, proof, proof, proof. And it was just such a wild experience to have all these people chanting about a math proof. And there you can see, well, here's some more various things that people had. That's the back of his hat. And there's a bunch of college students that made their own T-shirts. And I think that's the last image that I have. But I think what was really wonderful about this event was how people just came out in celebration of mathematics. And that's kind of what we really strive for. And for the younger kids, I mean, I can't imagine as a kid, being brought to something like this and being part of like 3,000 people that are chanting about a math proof. And you contrast that with a lot of kids, at least in the US, who like math, maybe are a little bit ostracized. It's, you're not that popular. You're not the star of the basketball team. You're the star of the math team. But now here was a chance for people to be out and see that it's really okay to like math, and there are lots and lots of other people who like math. So, so that was a lot of fun for us. And I think that is the end. Well, I'm on microphone and you're not.
That's
so
true.
I think we need to switch back one more time.
Well, it's probably not worth it if I stand close enough to you. You hear me? So those are a bunch of outreach things that we do. We of course do lots of going to fairs and festivals and doing small scale constructions. Here's one that I wanted to just briefly show because it's one that we've done. That of course I saw some echoes of it here in the shops. You'll often see this stellated dodecahedron made out of metal or something. This is a way of making that stellated dodecahedron out of 30 pipe cleaners. And it's pretty easy to do. We're out of time now to do it right now, but later on in the afternoon, if anybody wants, we could do a little workshop and build this together if anyone is interested. And we have lots of other activities like this that we would be happy to. I know that we heard yesterday about a lot of activities that you do here that are similar, and we would be very glad to exchange and share ideas and develop new ideas together. So thank you very much, and if there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer.